On this episode of the Baja Samurai content series, Carter decides that after months of stalling, it's time to actually do something for his viewers.
Who wrote that?
You did.
Right. Oh, can you at least make it sound a little bit cooler for me?
Sure. One samurai, 300 horsepower, 12 months of stalling.
Bro, that's not what I meant.
I charge by the word here, kid.
Wait, what did he just say? You said it was free.
Hey, can you just stick to what's on the episode for me?
Carter test fits his new LFX engine in the Samurai for the first time, while telling bad jokes to his viewers.
I fucking give up. What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 4 of my Baja Samurai content series. As you just so eloquently heard, we're going to be test fitting my LFX engine and my Suzuki Samurai for the first time ever. Now, before we start, I want you to know I have never done this before, but I have watched it at least 100 times on car shows, so that pretty much makes me an expert on the subject. Right? And unlike the stock Suzuki Samurai drivetrain, I'm probably not going to be able to do this one with my bare hands. So, let's go over a quick list of things that you're going to need to try and test fit an engine on your own. Number 1, an engine. Number 2, an engine hoist. Number 3, some chains. Number 4, a load leveler. Not necessary, but definitely handy. Numbers 5 through 99, money. Lots of money. And most importantly, don't forget this one, number 100, excuses to tell your wife on why you spent said money. Alright, so I already went to Harbor Freight and got myself a 2-ton engine hoist and a load leveler. I did have some problems with the hoist and I had to put some more hydraulic fluid in it, but you did hear I got it from Harbor Freight, right? And I'm not going to be adding tool costs to my running total, which is safe for now, because unless it's a buy that's super specific to this project, I'm going to consider it a garage buy. And now that I have an engine and a hoist, I just had to figure out a way to connect the two so I could get it from the stand to the Samurai to test fit it. So let's go check out the LFX and see what we're working with. Alright, so here's the LFX engine. Now what I've seen on most car shows is they try and mount it on the 4 corners of the engine, more than likely because that's the most balanced way to do it. And they usually use the exhaust manifold, bolts that go there, probably because they're really sturdy. But I don't know if you can see it. What's really unique about the LFX engine is they have a single exhaust manifold output. That's because the manifold, from what I understand, is all internal to the engine. That's going to save me probably a ton of room in the engine bay, but unfortunately it causes some issues with trying to find a balanced way to mount the hoist to the engine. Now there are some holes here on the engine. I probably could have figured it out if I spent enough time. I would have had to figure out what all the bolt threads are, and I'm going to have to do that eventually anyways, but what I thought would be the simplest way was to create the equivalent of a carb mounting plate. Now there's no carb on this engine, obviously, but you can use essentially the same thing with the intake, because there is a spot here for the intake manifold. And I have seen them made for the LS engines with 8 cylinders, but there aren't any readily available for the LFX, the 6-cylinder. And the universal ones don't work either because there's a very tight spot for it to fit, and on top of that the bolt pattern is offset. So I wasn't really finding anything online that I thought would work, so I'm just going to fab one up. Now I would be concerned about using a carb lifting plate on an engine to lift it up if it was a really heavy combo with engine and transmission. But this LFX engine is all aluminum. I think it's right around 300 pounds. I really don't have much concern at all. There are 6 bolts here, so I think we'll be fine. So let me go grab the plate I fabbed up and I'll show you what it's about. Alright, so here's my carb mounting plate. I made it out of 3/16 steel because that's what most of the ones being sold online were made with. And the easy part was cutting out this notch. There's some stuff up in the intake area you have to work around, so you can't just have a rectangle. I just use an angle grinder. It's pretty easy to do. But the hard part for me was getting these mounting holes in the right place. Now I'm not an expert, so I'm sure there was an easier way to do this, but I had to figure it out one way or another. So I used some ram board. If you're not familiar with ram board, you can pick it up at Home Depot. It's pretty cheap. Comes in a big roll, easy to use, great for when you're trying to fab stuff. So I basically just cut this, put it up there, made sure that it fit, and then we had to figure out the bolt pattern. So what I did was I actually took some bolts, I cut the heads off of them, I put them in all the holes that were up there, I put a dab of paint on the top of each one, and then I took this ram board and I pressed it right on top of them. What that did was it told me exactly where all these holes should be. So then I drilled out the holes, and I unfortunately realized after I did it that I probably shouldn't have done it with ram board the first time when you're talking about drilling holes, because this has some flex to it and they're not going to be in the exact place, and 3/16 doesn't have any give to it. So I needed something a little more sturdy, so I transferred them to this scrap piece I had laying around the garage. I'm not sure what gauge this is, but it was sturdy enough. So I just transferred the holes over. There were some holes that were a little off, so I'm glad I did this, or else that would have been junk. So I was able to move them a little bit on this, get them to where they needed to be, and then I transferred them. Once I figured out that they all fit in the right place, I transferred them to this heavier stuff, and then they all lined up great, which was perfect. And then all I had to do was take a piece of 3/16 flat bar, just cut a small piece off. I did a weld on each side, to really make sure that it was on there good. I also drilled 3 holes so that I can use hooks to pull the engine up, but that's pretty much it. It wasn't anything too complicated. I'm sure I made it way harder than it had to be. So please, if you know an easier way, let me know in the comments, and maybe you could save the next guy some trouble, save me some trouble. But hey, it worked, and let's go talk about mounting it to the engine. All right, so after I finished fabbing up the mounting plate, it sits nice and flush here where the intake would, and I went to the local dealership and picked up the intake mounting bolts. Cue the running total. I know, right? Dealerships. But after I got home and put them in where they're supposed to go, I saw that they don't exactly sit flush with the engine. They're a little too tall, so this isn't going to work for the mounting plate that I've designed. So I just took the bolts down to the local hardware store, matched the thread pattern, and now we have these nice bolts that are going to go right in the same spot. They're going to push the mounting plate flush to the engine, so we'll stay nice and tight. All that was left besides that, I got a couple of those spring hooks, which you'll see in a moment, and they're each rated for, I think, 750 pounds a piece, with 2 of them 1,500 pound load. So even with this thing moving around and fitting in the engine, I have really no concerns about the weight. So that's pretty much it. So without further ado, I think we're ready for liftoff.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
Mission Control, we have liftoff.
Okay, all jokes aside, bottom line is I got the LFX engine test fitted in the Suzuki Samurai engine bay for the first time. And man, this thing looks sweet. I can't picture any other engine in here now that I've seen it. The mounting plate that I made worked perfectly. The 2 hooks were super simple to use. It takes all of 10 seconds to hook it to the hoist. Brought it across the garage, dropped it in here, and honestly, the fact that it's center mounted right up top gives me all the room in the world to work around this engine. And when I'm doing so much customization, I'm gonna need that room to work on the engine mounts and headers and everything else. So, normally, like I said, the chains would be out here on the side and they're gonna kind of be getting in your way. But since it's all center mounted up here, I'm not gonna have to worry about any of that. That being said, it's not all fun and games. I already see some issues I'm gonna have to work around here, and actually let's go over those right now. So the first problem I see, and honestly it's probably the biggest one, is the overall height of the engine. As it sits right now, the hood was shut. But I think that once we put the intake on there, we're gonna run into some problems. As you saw earlier in the video, those intake bolts are pretty high. That gives you a sense of how high that intake is. And it would definitely hit the hood, and I want to avoid putting in a giant cowl or a scoop if I can. So I'm going to need to look at some ways to creatively cut down on the overall height of this engine. And I think that quite frankly, that's going to come in the form of the oil pan and where the axle sits. Right now the engine is sitting on the axle, which is a big problem. So let's go underneath and take a look and see what we're working with. Okay, so we're down here in the engine bay, down at the oil pan, and clearly it's hitting the differential, which is a problem. So there's a couple things we can do. One, you see there's a big gap here in the dip in the oil pan. So one option is to take the engine, push it further against the firewall, it's not flush against it right now, and possibly even cut into the firewall and try and push it in even deeper. That would get the differential into this dip, it would give us another 4 or 5 inches of clearance, and we might be all right. So that's definitely a potential option. Another option is one that I heard of from Andrew Keisler over at Keisler Automation. Really nice guy. He's one of the most knowledgeable guys on LFX swaps I've seen. He does it all the time in Mazdas. And one thing he talked about is they take the front wheel drive oil pan, which is about an inch or two shorter according to him, and has a different configuration. That might save me some space as well. He's also had some experience modifying these oil pans to cut notches out to make room for a differential. I think he did it once in a Toyota as well that had a front diff that he had to work around. Certainly not an easy task, but definitely an option. Okay, so if you're going to be putting the LFX engine into a stock Suzuki Samurai, just know the height is going to be a problem for you. You're going to have to overcome it by either cutting into the pan, putting the front wheel drive pan on it, possibly still cutting into that, suspension lift, pushing it back possibly deeper into the firewall, possibly a scoop or a cowl. There's a number of things you can do, but you're gonna have to address it. It's not just gonna go and sit in there. And I knew that going in, but quite honestly, it's not gonna be a problem for me more than likely. And I know what you're thinking, Carter, how could it possibly not be a problem for you? Well, if you want the answer to that, you're gonna have to tune into episode 5. Stay dusty.